Adolf Hitler was the leader of the German National Socialist Workers' Party. Through convincing oratory, outright illegal and violent tactics, he became the leader of Germany from 1933 to 1945. When he became Chancellor of Germany, he lessened no time in establishing himself as an autocratic dictator. Hitler's parents were named Clara and Alois Hitler. His father was a civil servant, customs official, who was a strict and sometimes violent father. Hitler was born at Braunau am Inn, which is a small Austrian village across from the German border, Bavaria. He did aspire to be an artist before he found his real passion in politics. However, he was not talented enough at the arts, for when he applied to the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, he failed the entrance exam twice. Before his entrance into politics, Hitler fought during World War I on the Western Front, as a volunteer in the Bavarian army. This certain hardship he experienced was certain to have shaped his views and perhaps even warped his mind, as it did with so many others at that time. Hitler had deep blue eyes that were said to have a fanatical hypnotic quality. His hair was brown and straight. He did take on a vegetarian diet near the end of his life, but contrary to popular belief, for the most part of his existence, he was not a vegetarian. Hitler had a dog, a German shepherd during his time as dictator of Nazi Germany called Blondie, who lived from 1941 to 1945. Hitler was an animal lover, or at least wanted to be seen as one by the public. Blondie died after he ordered it to be given cyanide capsules that were intended for himself. He was convinced the suicide capsules were not the real thing. He was grief-stricken after Blondie died as a result of his order. The suicide capsules were genuine. There are more than rumors that Hitler had only one testicle. There was a song during the wartime, "Hitler has only got one ball," sung by the British. This one testicle allegation could very well have been just a propaganda myth, as there does not appear to be any conclusive proof of it. Hitler did spend time in prison, Landsberg prison, Bavaria, 9 months of a 5-year sentence, for a failed attempt to overthrow the government coup, when he was leader of the NSDAP, the National Socialist Workers' Party. This attempted coup in Munich was called the Beer Hall Putsch. His time in prison was said to be cushy, having special privileges. In prison, he began his infamous book My Struggle, Mein Kampf, in which he blamed the Jews for the supposed wrongs of communism and international capitalism. 10 million copies of his book were either given away or sold before the war was over. Adolf Hitler's master plan, even before becoming the dictator of Germany, was one of expansion through warfare. He was a military dictator, there is no doubt of that. He wanted living space, Lebensraum, for the Germanic Aryan peoples, so they could produce large families, so that they could take over the earth. He was an idealist. His regime was totalitarianist to the core. He ultimately had the first and final say on everything. All enemies of the state were hung, shot or put in death concentration camps, which he ordered constructed on coming to power. The concentration camps were places where people were put to be worked to death. There were also the death camps, specifically for the gassing of people and the incineration of their carcasses. The 6 death camps located in occupied Poland were called Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, Majdanek and Auschwitz-Birkenau. Holocaust deniers and revisionists claim that the mass gassings and cremations were a myth. The mainstay of their argument is that it would be impossible to incinerate 6 million people without the use of masses of fuel, which they claim was not present at the death camps. The Nazis used a substance named Zyklon B to poison to death its victims in the gas chambers. These Zyklon B pellets converted to a deadly gas when exposed to air. Zyklon B was a substance that was used for fumigation, before it was found out that it could be used effectively for mass murder. The gas chambers were designed internally to look like giant communal shower units, so the victims would not panic upon entering. Sonderkommandos were more often than not Jewish camp inmates that were forced, through pain of death, to help the Nazis move the recently gassed victims into the incinerators. People were also rounded up and put in what were called ghettos. Ghettos, then, were cities that had a secured perimeter fence around them stopping the inhabitants getting out. They were crammed full of Jewish people. For example, the Warsaw Ghetto, Poland, saw 400,000 Jews forced into an area of 1.3 square miles. Jews were taken from these ghettos to the death concentration camps in cattle carts via the rail network. The conditions in these carts were appalling. Men died in transit. He knew the power of propaganda. political communication designed to influence public opinion, and he had found an effective propaganda minister in Joseph Goebbels. Everything at their disposal was utilized: comics, newspapers, radio, photography, magazines, art, films, etc. Hitler's war machine began to be built as soon as he gained power with the mass manufacture of weapons and the design of new ones. This, combined with expansive building projects, created mass-paid work for the German people, which was so desperately needed. Hitler's master plans lifted Germany out of its great economic depression, that made him very popular amongst his own Germanic people. The German military, under the reign of the Nazi Party, took nation after nation in Europe using blitzkrieg, lightning war, tactics. The tactics of lightning war were not seen before, which is why the defeated nations were somewhat flabbergasted at how easily the Nazis conquered them. These lightning wars were nothing like the trench warfare Hitler himself endured during World War I. World War II did begin after the Nazi-controlled German military invaded Poland. Adolf Hitler was a believer in the superiority of the mythological Aryan race. The racial term Aryan was spoken often and by many, long before Hitler, in every ethnic European descended state, including America and Britain. Unlike today, people generally were more racist, and openly so, compared to modern times. Lots of what is said about Hitler and the Nazis in documentation is wrong and misleading. Do not always believe what you read. Propaganda lies against the Nazis still exist to this day. There was and still is a belief held by racialists that there was a distinctly separate, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white-skinned, tall, super race that originated from the northlands of Europe tens of millennia ago. The racial human evolutionary theory held by the National Socialists is detailed next. The first original humans, Homo sapiens, were black Africans, and they evolved around 250,000 years ago in northeast Africa from Homo erectus. These original humans were little different to the black African nomadic racial tribes that inhabit the northeast Africa region today. The environment there has not changed at all since that time, and thus neither have they. A tribe of these black Africans migrated out of northeast Africa around 130,000 years ago. This origin and migration theory is often referred to as the out of Africa theory. They migrated to the north of Europe, Scandinavia, west of the mountain ranges running through present-day Norway. They settled there, living by the coast. After approximately 85,000 years of total isolation in Scandinavia, the original black African tribe evolved into the Nordic race, a racial breed with blonde hair, big blue eyes, white skin, towering height and a large cranial capacity of approximately 1600 cubic centimeters. All uniform in appearance, all the same, homogeneous. Interbreeding had occurred because of isolation and time. There was a much warmer period during the last ice age that started around 130,000 years ago. This was the time when the first black Africans migrated to the north of Europe, Scandinavia. This interglacial period lasted around 85,000 years. The Nordic race that had evolved after approximately 85,000 years left Scandinavia before the Ice Age became too inhospitable through extreme cold. Cro-Magnon skeletal remains throughout Eurasia that have been dated to 45,000 years ago prove this. The interglacial period had come to an end. The unique Nordic racial group could have only evolved in Scandinavia. The lack of light throughout the year and icy conditions are the only environmental factors that can explain the evolution of blonde hair, blue eyes, white skin, large cranial capacity, etc. There is simply nowhere else where these physical and mental traits could have developed, as they are so different in physical appearance to the other races of man. The environment must also have been so very different. Yes, the encapsulating mountain ranges running through present-day Norway stand out clearly as their place of origin. The Earth's water levels were substantially lower 130 to 45,000 years ago by 4 to 6 meters, so the habitat where the Nordic race evolved is now well below the sea. The physical evidence of them originating from there has been totally destroyed by the swelling sea level and all-consuming ice age. 45,000 years ago there was a Nordic race and also 4 other distinct, dark-featured human races: African, Indian, Far East Asian and Australian Aboriginal. 45,000 years ago the Nordic tribes spread down into Europe, occupying many different parts of it in separate tribal groupings. Tribes broke off and then spread into Asia, In the Middle East area, a Nordic race tribe came across an Indian race tribe that had left their evolutionary area of India. These two distinctly different racial tribes mixed together and a new breed of man was formed, whom we know today as Arabic. The Arabic population expanded in the Middle East and then tribes of them migrated west into the north of Africa. From North Africa they moved further north, up into Spain, Italy and Greece. There, they came across the original Nordic racial tribes with their blonde hair and blue eyes. The Arabic tribes mixed with the Nordic tribes in southern Europe, which formed the basis of whom we know today as the Spanish, the Italians and the Greeks. The same thing happened in Far East Asia. The Nordic race mixed with the dark-featured Far East Asian race, and this produced what we know today as Chinese or Japanese ethnic types. These new mixed ethnic tribes moved west, mixing with Nordic tribes in Eurasia, which in turn formed the basis of whom we know today as the Slavic people. Yes, Europeans are mostly of the Nordic race, but are also part Indian race and part Far East Asian race to varying degrees. People in the south of Europe are generally more Indian racially than those from the north of Europe, whilst people from the east of Europe are generally more Far East Asian racially than those from the west of Europe. Generally, there has been little mixing between the Nordic racial tribes and the black African or Australian Aboriginal racial tribes. Hitler knew he was not a pure Aryan. He had dark features himself, dark hair, the Indian trait coming through. You may read elsewhere in books and on the internet that Hitler thought the Germanic people were pure. This is not true. He knew that the German people were not pure anymore. This is simply a propaganda lie. He did however want to bring back these perfect people, Aryans, through the practice of state-enforced eugenics. Hitler pronounced ethnic Northern Europeans, Germans, English, Norwegians, Icelanders, Dutch, Swedes and Danes, to be the best specimens of Aryans. Not pure, but the best specimens available. Hitler considered African Negroes and Australian Aboriginals at the bottom of this supposed racial hierarchy, as they through the passage of time did not mix with the Aryan race, unlike the Indians and Mongoloids did. In his view, Hitler and his Nazi sycophants believed in this ancient, Aryan master race. He wanted to bring them back. That was his obsession, to create a racially genetically perfect people, to inherit the earth. Hitler brought about a state eugenics program of selective breeding, like what humans do to animals, dogs, horses, cows, etc., to ensure the very best stock is produced. The Nazis did not allow marriages between ethnically Nordic Europeans and those they deemed further down on their racial hierarchy. Those with hereditary genetic condition were sterilized as to render them incapable of producing offspring, to stop their hereditary defects being passed on to the next generation. Males that were admitted into the Lebensborn program had to prove they had no non-Nordic ancestry to back as far as 1750 and were in top shape, health-wise. It is said that the male had to prove purity. This really is not true. No one was pure at the time of Nazism. Hitler knew that. Hitler did not want Lebensborn men to have any Semitic Asian ethnic ancestry. He wanted them to be as much Nordic ethnically as was possible. This eugenics program, Lebensborn, created over 42,000 Nordic children. The Nazis also took Nordic-looking women and children from nations that they invaded. 200,000 Nordic-looking children were taken from Poland alone. It is clear that Adolf Hitler had grossly underestimated the war capabilities of the Soviet Union. What he said in the beginning about the invasion into Russia appeared to be true. We have only to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down. And initially, it did. However, as time passed during the invasion of the Soviet Union, they showed amazing organizational supremacy and the ability as a Marxist nation to focus its entire attention on one thing, winning the war against Hitler's Germany. All in all, the Aryan supremacist vision of one man Adolf Hitler led to the deaths of millions through war, starvation and of course, the gas chambers, Holocaust. Despot, Adolf Hitler, 56. Took his own life briefly before Nazi Germany was defeated, alongside his wife Eva Braun, 33, in a Berlin bunker. It is believed that Hitler shot himself in the head with a Walther PPK pistol. He possibly took a hydrogen cyanide capsule as well, whilst his wife Eva certainly took a cyanide capsule at his side. With the use of gallons of petrol and a match, their carcasses were incinerated by fellow Nazis outside the Chancellor's bunker. The end.